Welcome back, lovely ladies. If you want to become the woman of your dreams, make sure to hit that subscribe button and like this video. And join our Patreon for even more exclusive content. Now, let's dive into today's story.
I grew up in the small town sprawl of rural Alabama, where traditions are honored in ways that can be both surprising and contradictory. One annual fixture was the so-called womanless pageant, held in nearly every county to raise money for various charities. This event brought together members of the community for a night of light-hearted fun. Boys and young men, all over 18 in our group, would dress up in gowns, full makeup, and heels, and strut down the stage to applause, laughter, or both. The incongruity of it all had never escaped me. Alabama, with its tendency toward rigid conservatism, often frowned upon any deviation from what most considered normal. Yet nobody in town seemed to blink at the sight of these pageants. Maybe it was because they were for charity. Maybe it was because it gave everyone a license to enjoy something whimsical for a night, with none of the usual judgments attached. People had asked me if I would ever compete. My parents had tried urging me into it more than once. They thought it would be good for me to show some community spirit, but I balked every time. Being under the spotlight in a dress in front of the entire town felt like a nightmare waiting to happen. My name is Mike, and at 20 years old, I lived in quiet dread of standing on that stage and having everyone stare and laugh. I never had the nerve to participate. One year, though, my friend Joey decided to sign up. He was 19, nearly a year younger than me, but we both attended the same local college. Joey lived in the same subdivision as I did, only 3 houses down the street. We had known each other for most of our lives, having gone through the same schools, same sports leagues, and the same slow summer days that stretched endlessly in our hometown. He and I were close, but not the kind of friends who hung out every day. Our interests started to diverge a bit after high school, but we still had that childhood bond. Joey was a little on the short side, slender, with an unassuming presence and a perpetual good nature that made people gravitate toward him. He could make a joke out of the smallest annoyance and was always the first to see the bright side of things. Even so, I never pictured him in a sparkly gown. I never thought he'd volunteer for this kind of event. But he did, and he seemed determined enough not to back out. He picked Joy as his pageant name. Some pageants in other counties insisted on using witty pun-like names, but ours left it optional. Joy was short and sweet, and I guessed it did fit his optimistic personality. I heard from him about a week before the event that he had found a pale blue gown through a local thrift store. He was excited that it actually fit, and I remember him marveling at how complicated the garment was, with various layers and hidden clasps. "I look ridiculous in it, but it's for a good cause," he told me, shrugging while we stood on his front porch a couple of days before the show. Despite a hint of nerves, he seemed to be looking forward to trying something completely out of his comfort zone. I admired that attitude. A part of me felt envious that I didn't have the courage to do something similar, although at the time I would never have admitted it. The night of the pageant arrived in early spring, just as the humidity in Alabama started picking up. The venue was our local high school auditorium, which was big enough to seat a few hundred people. They had done their best to dress it up nicely with stage lights, ribbons, and cheap flower arrangements. The audience was a mixture of families, friends, townspeople who came out for a bit of fun, and older alumni. The energy in the air felt like any small-town celebration, crackling with anticipation. I arrived in the auditorium foyer, scanning the milling crowd for any sign of Joey's parents or mutual acquaintances. I soon spotted a sign that directed contestants and volunteers around the side entrance. I walked that way, hoping to find Joey before the show. Standing near a side door was a vision in pink, a tall figure in a pastel gown with neatly styled hair and an elegant posture. Even from a distance, I could see that this was a guy, yet he looked convincingly graceful in his ensemble. When I got closer, he offered a bright smile. "Hi there," he greeted, taking in my plain jeans and polo shirt. "Are you competing tonight?" I was momentarily tongue-tied. "Me? No way. I'm just here to support a friend." He smiled, performing a dramatic little curtsy. "I'm just here to welcome folks and point them to their dressing rooms." He gestured at the door behind him. "You can see your friend in there. They've got the contestants' chosen names taped to each door, so I hope you know your friend's pageant name." "Oh, right," I said, feeling a little embarrassed. "He's competing as Joy." He gave a bright nod. "That's so pretty. Good luck to Joy. And hey, if you ever get the urge to try this, maybe next year?" I gave a nervous laugh, tried to be polite. "We'll see. You look great, by the way." "Thanks, sweetheart," he said with a wink. "Now, you'd better head inside if you want to find Joy." The door opened onto a hallway that branched in two directions. There were people bustling about, some half-dressed in their gowns, some wearing robes to protect their makeup, a few mothers or older sisters assisting with hair. The atmosphere reminded me of a high school play production, except this was more flamboyant in every sense. A young man wearing a red beaded evening gown stood near one of the doors, anxiously tugging at the bodice. He looked to be in the older category of contestants, maybe 21 or so, with broad shoulders and artfully applied makeup. "Nice gown," I offered as I squeezed by him. He batted his heavily mascaraed lashes. "Oh, it's gorgeous, right? But it's killing me. My mom spent so much on it and I can't breathe in it." I nodded sympathetically. He sighed, then rubbed the side of his waist. "Ah, well, it's for a good cause," he said, flashing a tight smile before heading down the hall. I passed several doors with sheets of paper taped up. Lola, Veronica, Delilah, each marking a contestant's station. Eventually, I reached the door labeled Joy. I wondered whether I should knock, but I decided to open it just a crack to see if Joey was decent. That turned out to be a mistake. He stood in the middle of the cramped dressing area, wearing only a padded bra, some shapewear that cinched his waist, and a pair of sheer nylons. He let out a startled yelp. "Mike! Holy, close the door!" he cried, frantically grabbing for a robe draped across a chair. I stammered an apology, stepping inside and letting the door click shut. My face burned. "I'm sorry, man. I just didn't think—" He fumbled into the robe. "Wow, next time knock or something?" "Right, sorry again." I tried to keep my eyes on the floor, though the image of him in shapewear was already seared into my mind. "I just wanted to wish you good luck." "Well, I'm not quite ready." His cheeks were fiery red. "I'd appreciate some privacy until I get my gown on." I nodded quickly, ignoring the swirl of half-formed thoughts running through my mind. For some reason, it made me uneasy to see him in that state of dress. I had seen him shirtless on countless occasions, at the beach or the local pool. But this was profoundly different. The shape of his body was altered in ways I'd never witnessed. The line between Joey and Joy was fuzzy, and I didn't know where to stand or how to feel. "Sure," I said. "I'll wait in the hall." He waved me out. "Thanks. I'll be faster if I'm not worrying about you barging in." "Gotcha." In the hallway, I tried to collect myself. People were scurrying in every direction, some of them men in half-applied makeup. A few stepped gingerly in high heels that clicked on the linoleum. One looked like he could be a genuine beauty queen if you didn't look too closely. Another had a short dress that showed off extremely hairy legs, which he hadn't bothered to shave. I tried not to stare, though it was surreal seeing so many guys dressed in flamboyant female attire, especially in a place as conservative as our town. After what felt like a solid 15 minutes, Joey's door opened. I turned and saw him in his pale blue gown, and my thoughts stalled. The fabric shimmered under the fluorescent hall lights, hugging his waist and flowing around his legs. A wig of glossy hair framed his face, and the makeup softened his normally boyish features. I had never in my life seen him look so radiant. My chest felt tight, and I struggled to form words. He seemed to tense, perhaps bracing for me to make a joke at his expense. "I know, it looks ridiculous," he said quietly. I shook my head, finally finding my voice. "No, it's amazing. You look really nice." He glanced down, as though he couldn't believe I was serious. "Thanks. You don't have to spare my feelings. I know I'm not exactly ready for the runway." "Actually, you might be," I insisted. "If I were judging, I'd give you first place, no question." He laughed, a light, almost musical laugh that I wasn't used to hearing from him. "Stop. You're just being extra supportive." "I mean it," I said, even as a strange sensation rippled through me. It was a mixture of delight and confusion, like my brain couldn't decide how to process the person standing before me. Before I could dig myself into a deeper hole, Joey sighed. "I should head out soon. The first category starts in about 10 minutes. "You're in the youngest group, right?" I asked. Technically, it was an 18 to 20 bracket. Everyone else older than that was in a 21 and over group. He nodded. "They want us lined up in the wings in 5 minutes. I'd better go. Thanks for dropping by." He walked off, and I watched him move with tentative steps in his heels, his gown gently swaying. I felt an unsettling rush, admiring how attractive he looked, while also fighting the voice in my head that told me I shouldn't be looking at him that way. Joey was my friend. He was also a guy. None of this was supposed to be stirring up those sensations. I headed back to the auditorium, found a seat near the middle. My palms felt sweaty, and my stomach lurched with nerves, as if I were the one about to take the stage. The lights dimmed, and one of the event organizers, an energetic woman in her 40s, walked onto the stage to welcome us, talking about the tradition of the pageant and the charities that would benefit. Then, finally, she introduced the first group of contestants. They walked on in single file, a procession of pastel and shimmer. It was hard not to grin at some of them, because they either looked incredibly awkward or so over the top that the campiness was impossible to ignore. But then came Joey, Joy, in that pale blue gown, stepping carefully, holding his posture. He looked more poised than I expected, though the expression on his face betrayed some nerves. When he got near the front row, I saw him glance in my direction. I gave a quick wave, and to my surprise, he waved back in the most dainty, almost flirtatious way. My heart thumped so hard that I had to remind myself to breathe. Did he know how that gesture came across? Why did it feel like everything in my chest was flipping over? The pageant for his bracket lasted about an hour. There was a brief introduction for each contestant, a silly Q&A segment, then a small talent portion, though it was mostly comedic. Joey's talent was lip-syncing to a pop song while performing a few dance moves. The audience hooted and clapped in encouragement. I found myself caught between wanting him to do well and not wanting the entire world to see him like that. It was a swirl of protective feelings I couldn't quite articulate. At the end of the segment, the judges took a few minutes to confer before announcing the winner. Despite everything, Joey did not end up winning. The winner was a guy in an elaborately decorated pink and silver gown who had performed a comedic baton twirling act that brought down the house. Joey smiled and clapped politely, but I could sense a flicker of disappointment on his face. The next age brackets followed. I tried to pay attention, but my thoughts kept returning to Joey. When the entire event wrapped up, I decided to go around to the backstage area again to see if I could find him and congratulate him on a valiant effort. Back in that hallway, the atmosphere had changed. Some contestants were hugging, others were reuniting with their families. I caught sight of a tall guy in a strapless purple gown leaning against the wall and giggling about something with his friend. Then, I saw the older group's winner, a guy in a shimmering blue number, chatting excitedly with a friend dressed in plain jeans. They embraced, and the guy in the gown planted a playful kiss on his friend's cheek. It was so odd to see such open gestures in a place where typical norms told guys not to do that. Yet the pageant environment seemed to erase many usual hang-ups. Eventually, I spotted Joey sitting on a narrow bench along the corridor, gown fanned out around his legs. His chin was propped on his hand as he stared at the floor. I walked over and sat down next to him. "Hey," I said softly. "You did great, seriously." He gave me a sideways glance. "Thanks, but second place would have been cool. Fourth or fifth place, or whatever I ended up with, is a little embarrassing." He heaved a light shrug. "Ah, well, I got a few laughs out of it, right?" "You got more than a few laughs, and plenty of cheers, too." "That's true," he said, his tone resigned. "I guess I got caught up in it for a second. When I walked on stage, all that clapping and hooting made me think, I can do this. I can be the most convincing woman here." He smirked ruefully. "Guess not convincing enough." I felt a sudden rush of sympathy. "Well, you were more convincing than you realize," I said, a slight quiver in my voice. He turned to face me, eyebrows raised. "What do you mean?" I cleared my throat, fighting off the awkwardness. When I saw you backstage, I was really impressed." He let out an unsteady laugh. "Thanks, I guess. But it's time for me to get out of this gown before I trip and break an ankle in these stupid shoes." I swallowed a small lump in my throat. "Before you go, could we, I don't know, talk a bit longer?" He threw me a perplexed look. "Why?" "I just want to hang out, I guess. So we can hang out in a gown and heels?" He shook his head. "This is a one-night deal, Mike. Soon as I get home, I'm packing this dress away and never putting it on again." He shifted, scooting a little away from me on the bench. I realized with some panic that I might never see him in this look again. That feeling of wanting to preserve the sight for a bit longer took hold of me in a way I couldn't explain. For a moment, he and I locked eyes. The softness in his gaze made my heart skip. I had the wild urge to lean closer and do something unthinkable. Before I could rethink it, I leaned in and pressed my lips to his. For a second, everything around me disappeared. His lips parted in shock, and then he jerked away with a start. "What the Mike?" He leapt to his feet, teetering on the heels. "Have you lost your mind?" His wide eyes swept the hallway to see if anyone had witnessed that. Nobody seemed to be looking. I scrambled up. I'm sorry," I managed. "I don't know what came over me." He glared, lower lip trembling with anger or confusion, maybe both. "You do something like that again, and I swear I'll never speak to you. You hear me?" "I hear you." My cheeks burned. My pulse was drumming, and I couldn't believe what I had just done. He inhaled shakily, struggling to regain composure. "You know I'm a guy. Just because I'm wearing this stupid gown doesn't make me a woman. That was a messed up move, okay?" I nodded, my head bowed. "I know. I'm sorry." "Great," he muttered. "Now, if you don't mind, I'm getting out of this thing. We never mention that again, okay?" I wiped a hand across my face, grappling with all these intense feelings, and finally forced myself to speak. "Okay, we won't mention it." Joey nodded, took another look around, then hurried off to his dressing room in a flurry of skirts. I stood there for a moment, trying to make sense of everything. Once the shock of what I did settled, I felt an ache of regret. A part of me realized I might have just jeopardized our friendship. I went home that night with my thoughts swirling like leaves in a storm. My parents were still at the auditorium, chatting with neighbors, so I had the place to myself. I paced around my living room, feeling that I had stepped into a territory I didn't understand. Despite my lingering guilt, I couldn't help but recall how beautiful Joey had looked. The next day, I woke up with the memory of that impulsive moment still fresh. I decided to walk over to Joey's place around midday. The neighborhood was quiet, the heat already building. He was outside in his driveway wearing basketball shorts and an old t-shirt, fiddling with a leaky hose. He glanced up and our eyes met with a moment of tension. "Hey," he greeted, voice neutral. "Hey," I said back. "Look, I just wanted to check on you. Also to apologize again." He nodded, but his expression remained guarded. "Okay." I took a breath, trying to speak carefully. I didn't mean anything weird by it. I swear. I don't want to make you uncomfortable. I think I was just caught up in the moment and..." He cut me off. "It's fine. Just forget it happened, all right? You were never the type to do something like that, so I'm chalking it up to a lapse in judgment. We don't have to talk about it. We can still be friends, but on one condition." "Sure, name it." He set the hose down and turned to face me. "No more talk about me dressing up. No more dresses, no more jokes about me doing it for you. That was a one-time charity event, and it's over. This is me, Joey, t-shirt and shorts. That's it." I nodded, though a swirl of conflicting emotions churned in my gut. "Got it." He sighed. "Good. Want to help me fix this hose? It's spraying everywhere." "Sure." It felt painfully awkward at first, kneeling in the driveway under the hot sun, patching up the old hose with tape, exchanging small talk about classes and the upcoming spring break. Eventually, we fell back into a semblance of normal banter. If an outsider had come along, they might have never guessed the tension simmering beneath the surface. That night, I dreamed of that same pale blue gown. Except in my dream, it wasn't backstage at the auditorium. Instead, we were in a grand marble-floored ballroom, a softly lit chandelier overhead. Joey, more accurately Joy, glided toward me, holding out a gloved hand. I remember feeling a jolt of excitement as I reached for that hand, the gown swishing around slender legs. We danced, and the dream had that surreal haze where everything felt romantic and fluid. Then joy began to fade, calling out a faint farewell that echoed until I bolted awake. Days turned to weeks. Joey and I stayed cordial, though we didn't hang out as often. Part of me wondered if the pageant had left him embarrassed, or if he was just busy. I tried burying my strange feelings, telling myself it was just an odd moment triggered by the atmosphere of the pageant. Still, I couldn't shake the way he had looked in that gown. Summer arrived. The local news started reporting on various other counties hosting their own womanless pageants, and I spotted a clip on a local channel featuring guys in outrageous costumes playing to the crowd. It was silly fun, yet it also stirred up that memory once again. That was the second year in a row that I had refused to take part. My parents joked about how maybe next year I'd find the nerve. I just shrugged. Toward the end of that summer, I caught wind that our county was planning an even bigger pageant the next spring, making it a more elaborate production with multiple categories and a bigger fundraising goal. The rumor was that they were going to add a daytime wear segment and interview segment, turning it into a full-blown spectacle. I had a quiet, irrational hope that maybe Joey would try again. A small part of me longed for Joy to reappear, despite the tensions it had caused. A few weeks before the event, I casually asked him if he planned on signing up. We were at my place, sitting on the back porch with sodas, having a conversation about everything and nothing. I tried to sound casual, but my pulse kicked up a notch. He gave me a suspicious look. No, why would I want to do that again? I already embarrassed myself once. That's enough. My shoulders drooped. You didn't embarrass yourself. You were great. I didn't win, and besides, it was never about winning. He twisted the soda can in his hands. "I just don't see the point of going through that again." I pressed my lips together. I knew better than to push the subject, remembering our agreement. So I dropped it. The pageant rolled around, and I attended. This time, I had no illusions that Joey would be among the contestants. I sat in roughly the same seat as last year, scanning the stage lights and the swirling dresses. Some of the new participants were excellent, clearly having fun and playing it up. There were comedic talents, a few lip-sync bits, and a surprising tap dance routine. I should have been fully entertained, but my mind kept drifting. I realized how much I missed seeing Joey up there, how unique that feeling had been. At the end of the show, after the final winner was announced, I left quietly. There was no reason to go backstage. As I walked to my car, I felt a lingering sadness I couldn't explain. I knew better than to talk to Joey about it. He had made his stance clear. Even so, I kept recalling how radiant he had looked, and how my moment of overstepping might have destroyed any chance of seeing him that way again. Time marched on, as it does. The memory of that night never left me completely, but it did grow fainter as everyday life reasserted itself. Joey and I resumed a mostly normal friendship. We were part of the same circle in college, along with a few other folks who grew up in the area. We'd have coffee in between classes, or occasionally grab lunch. Sometimes, though, I'd notice a flicker in his expression if the conversation ventured toward clothes or the local thrift shop. As if for a split second, he remembered what it felt like to wear something fancy and be stared at by an audience. That sense of contradictory pride and humiliation. Maybe he remembered the conflicting feelings as sharply as I did, but neither of us voiced it. Months slipped into a year. The next pageant was announced, and it was a big deal since they'd expanded the charity drive. My parents teased me again about competing. I half joked, "Only if Joey does it," though we both knew that wasn't going to happen. Joey simply laughed awkwardly whenever someone teased him about his previous stint as Joy. The night of the pageant arrived, and once more I found myself in the audience, this time with a couple of friends from college. I was 21 now, old enough to have a drink or two with my buddies before the event. I tried to treat it as a harmless outing, but there was a hollow feeling in my chest. I stole a glance around the crowd to see if Joey was there. I caught sight of him near the back, sitting with his parents, wearing a plain t-shirt and jeans, baseball cap flipped backwards. It was almost comical how different he looked from my memory of him in that sleek, glittering gown. I considered going to say hello, but the show started and the lights dimmed. Several new contestants glided on stage, and the crowd whistled and chuckled as they sashayed. It was a decent show, I guess. The comedic routines were funny enough, and a couple of the contestants in the older categories had gone all out with expensive gowns, elaborate wigs, and choreographed numbers. But it all felt a bit empty to me. When the show ended, the crowd surged out toward the parking lot. I managed to make my way toward Joey, who was trailing behind his parents. He gave me a polite nod. "Hey," he said, "I almost forgot you'd be here." "Yeah, I come every year," I replied. "Even if I'm not brave enough to actually sign up." He gave a stiff little laugh. "Hey, once was enough for me. Couldn't pay me to do that again." His parents waved goodbye, leaving us standing near the edge of the lot. Everyone else was jostling around us to get to their cars. A dull yellow glow from the overhead lights gave everything a washed-out tone. "So, you heading home?" he asked. I shrugged. "Probably, unless you want to grab some food." He squinted toward the line of cars. "Sure, I could eat. Let me just tell my folks I'll catch a ride with you." A few minutes later, I was navigating us out of the congested lot. Neither of us said much at first. The local diner was open late, so that was our obvious destination. It felt kind of like old times, just two friends going out to eat. But in the background, the memory of that single night, that single kiss, lay between us like a silent ghost. We sat in a booth near the back of the diner. He picked at his napkin, rolling it between his fingers. After we ordered, he cleared his throat. "So, how was the show this year?" he asked, sounding a bit forced. "It was fine. They had some good acts. You would have liked the baton twirling, the same trick that won last year." He nodded. "I saw bits of it. I was kind of half watching. It's weird. I don't feel the same excitement I did back then. Maybe because now you know what it feels like to be on that stage." He paused, eyes flicking up at me. "Yeah, probably. There's something about being in front of all those people, wearing a dress. It changes your perspective." He stared out the window for a second. It was well past sunset, and the fluorescent lights in the parking lot cast a harsh glow. The waitress arrived with our drinks, giving us a cursory smile. Once she left, he spoke softly. "I know you're going to say I looked good in that dress. You said it 1,000,000 times, and I appreciate you trying to be supportive. But I can't do that again. It felt weird for me." "I'm not pushing you to do it," I said, my voice just as soft. "I get it. It was a one-time thing." He eyed me, as though searching for sincerity. "But you still... Why did you want me to do it again so bad?" I felt my pulse accelerate. Maybe it was time to be honest, in a limited sense. "I don't know. You were so confident in that moment. It felt like seeing a different side of you, and I guess I got caught up in it." He fidgeted with his straw. "Well, it freaked me out how you reacted. I didn't expect you to look at me like I was actually a woman. Then you..." He halted, glancing around as though making sure nobody was listening. "It was just a lot, okay? I don't want that to come between us." I nodded, my cheeks warm. "It won't. I promise. I've got your back, no matter what." He inhaled deeply and sipped his drink. "All right, let's change the subject." We moved on to talking about random stuff, school, old friends, the changes around town. The conversation drifted aimlessly, but at least it felt comfortable again. The tension started to thin. We drove home after our late meal. At his house, we lingered in the car for a moment. "Thanks for the ride," he said, undoing his seatbelt. "I'll see you around. And thanks for being cool about everything." "No problem," I said quietly, trying to offer a reassuring nod. He gave me a small, genuine smile, then climbed out and closed the door. I watched him disappear behind the wooden fence that led to his backyard, the porch light switching on a second later. I exhaled, sitting alone in my car. It felt like some intangible weight, had lifted, even though I still couldn't name every emotion I was feeling. In the following months, we never again touched the topic of him dressing up. Life moved on. Graduation from the local college was on the horizon for me, and I was preoccupied with job prospects and post-college plans. Joey had plans to continue working in his uncle's hardware store while saving up for additional schooling. Our adulthood was creeping up on us with all the new responsibilities that entailed. But every now and then, in that quiet space between drifting off to sleep and actual dreaming, my mind conjured the memory of him in that pale blue dress. The way the fabric hung on his frame, how the wig softened his face, the surprising grace in his stride, how he had looked at me backstage, uncertain but hopeful. I never brought it up with him again, because I respected his boundaries and because I feared losing our friendship. One impulsive moment of crossing the line had set off a chain of awkwardness that took months to repair. Another reckless step could have ended the relationship altogether. So I resigned myself to the fact that Joy, whatever she represented, was gone. An ephemeral figure that would never appear again outside of my dreams. Even so, dreams sometimes have a lingering power. They can show up uninvited, reminding us of certain memories. Over time, That night's events became less of an open wound and more of a bittersweet recollection. I had grown wiser in the sense that I didn't expect an encore. Joy was part of the past, a side of Joey that would not return. That next spring, with me on the verge of finishing my degree, I debated whether to attend the pageant yet again. My parents talked about going, and I felt that nostalgic pull, but I ultimately decided not to. I found an excuse, something about studying for finals. The truth was, I didn't see the point. Joey was definitely not going to participate, so I wasn't sure how I would feel watching a group of strangers in gowns, seeing glimpses of a memory that only made me restless. On the night of that year's show, I stayed home. My parents returned later, chattering about how it had been a fun night, how the turnout was bigger than ever, and how the winner this time wore an absolutely stunning gold gown. I feigned casual interest, nodding along, but a small part of me felt a twinge of regret for not going, even though I couldn't imagine what more I could have gotten out of watching it. Joey never brought up the pageant again, and neither did I. In the end, that single evening at the first pageant remained the only time I ever saw him in a dress. Sometimes, if we were hanging out, I'd get a flashback to the swirl of pale blue or the soft expression on his face when he had momentarily let his guard down. Then I'd blink, and it would be gone. Still, there was a curiosity that never quite died. If the conversation in our group of friends ever strayed toward outlandish charity stunts or college pranks, I'd wonder what it would have been like if he had done another pageant. Would he have felt more confident? Would I have kept my impulses in check? But the what-ifs just lingered without answers, like half-formed echoes in an empty auditorium. Summer came, and I finished my degree. Joey and I stayed in touch, though less frequently. I left Alabama briefly for a job interview in another state, and life seemed to accelerate. We promised each other we'd keep in contact, even if adulthood took us to different corners of the country. On my last evening in town, before moving to a neighboring state for work, I drove by the old high school auditorium. It was locked up and dark, but I pulled into the empty parking lot and got out of my car. The night air was thick and humid, crickets chirping in the distance. I walked around to the back, where I remembered that stage entrance sign and the excited swirl of contestants in gowns. Of course, no one was there now, just a dim exterior light and the gentle hush of the night. I closed my eyes, letting my memories pull me back. I could almost see the scene, the hall packed with cross-dressing contestants, the clack of high heels on linoleum, the half-laughter, half-cheering in the air, and Joey emerging in his pale blue gown, looking timid and radiant all at once. I pictured him twirling, that last shy glance as he left me backstage. In my mind's eye, Joy was smiling. I stood there for a long time, until the old school's security lights flickered. Then I climbed back into my car, heading home with that last bit of memory clutched gently in my chest. I didn't know where life would lead either of us, but I guessed that no matter where we went, that moment would always remain. Even if Joey never again wore a dress, and even if I never again felt that exact spark, the memory existed, an imprint in time that would never fully disappear. The next morning, I said my goodbyes to my parents and drove off to start a new chapter. Joey sent me a good luck text, telling me I'd do great. We didn't speak of the pageant or anything relating to that, but I thanked him. He wished me well, said he'd see me at Christmas if we both made it back to town, and that was that. I drove away, leaving behind the auditorium, the pageant, and a specific night that changed everything in subtle ways. Sometimes people drift in and out of roles they never anticipated. Sometimes a single event can reveal pieces of ourselves we'd rather not confront. In that small Alabama county, I might have left behind the swirl of those gowns, but in my mind, it would always remain. Even if joy had vanished with the final notes of that one performance, and Joey had slipped comfortably back into his routine, I still saw glimpses of something unspoken whenever our paths crossed or we shot each other a quick text. I had no illusions that we'd revisit that moment in real life, but dreams are stubborn, refusing to follow the scripts we lay out. Sometimes in the quiet of night, I still see that swirl of pale blue out of the corner of my eye, still hear the applause echoing in that small town auditorium, and they can't stop me from dreaming.
Did you like the story? Hit that like button and tell me what you thought in the comments. Do you want to hear more stories? Subscribe and hit the bell. For exclusive content and early access, check out our Patreon. You can find the link in the description, or you can watch any of the videos shown on my right. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.